Meantime, we turn to the other major news this evening, the new video of that horrific crash, an Air India passenger jet just moments after taking off.
This is an emergency. I repeat, this is an emergency. Everyone,
what's going on?
I don't know. Seats and fasten your seatbelts.
The past few months have been tough for aviation. From deadly crashes to emergency landings, it feels like bad news keeps coming. People are asking hard questions. Are planes getting less safe? Should we worry about flying? Is Boeing in trouble again? The recent string of accidents has left many travelers nervous and wondering if something bigger is wrong with aviation safety. But before we panic, let's look at what really happened and separate fact from fear. The Christmas tragedy that started it all. The wave of recent aviation disasters began on Christmas Day 2024. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 was heading to Grozny, Russia, when everything went wrong. The pilots faced terrible weather conditions and couldn't use their GPS navigation system because of electronic jamming in the area. The Embraer E190 was carrying 62 passengers and 5 crew members on what should have been a routine flight. But as they approached their destination, the crew found themselves dealing with problems they never trained for. The weather was getting worse, and their navigation systems weren't working properly due to military interference in the region. After 2 failed landing attempts, something much worse happened. The cockpit voice recorder captured a sonic boom, and suddenly all 3 hydraulic systems failed. The plane's main controls got stuck in one position, and the cabin lost pressure. Passengers later said 2 seats had exploded, which the pilots reported as a possible bird strike. The crew couldn't land in Russia due to bad weather at alternate airports. They asked air traffic control about other options, including Mineralnie Vody and Makhachkala, but the weather there was also terrible. The pilots then considered returning to their starting point in Baku, Azerbaijan, before finally deciding to cross the Caspian Sea to Aktau, Kazakhstan. What happened next shows just how skilled these pilots were. With no normal flight controls, they had to fly the plane using only the power from their engines. This technique, called differential thrust, is incredibly difficult and requires precise coordination between both pilots. They managed to keep the crippled aircraft in the air for over an hour and 15 minutes. As they approached Aktau Airport, the crew managed to lower their landing gear and even extend some flaps. But controlling the plane remained nearly impossible. The aircraft was badly damaged, with missile fragments having torn through the rear fuselage and damaged at least one engine and its associated wing. When they finally crashed about 5 kilometers from the runway, 35 passengers and 3 crew members died, including both pilots. But 29 passengers and 2 crew members survived, largely because of the pilots' heroic efforts to keep the plane under control until the very end. Later investigation revealed the real cause. The plane had been hit by anti-aircraft missile fragments while flying over an active conflict zone. Russian forces were reportedly watching for Ukrainian drones in the area when they mistakenly targeted the civilian airliner. Just 3 days after the Azerbaijan crash, a smaller accident happened in Canada that showed how quickly things can go wrong. Air Canada Flight 22259, operated by PAL Airlines, was landing in Halifax when its landing gear collapsed. The plane's left engine and wing hit the runway, creating sparks and fire as the de Havilland Dash 8 slid along the tarmac. The 73 passengers and 4 crew members watched in terror as flames shot from the engine and wing. But thanks to quick action from the crew and emergency responders, everyone evacuated safely with no reported injuries. The nighttime landing made the scene even more dramatic, with fire and sparks clearly visible against the dark sky. The cause was simple but serious. A tire had blown during takeoff from the departure airport, but nobody noticed. This seems impossible, but it happens more often than people realize. Ground crews and pilots do walk-around inspections, but a blown tire isn't always obvious, especially if it happens during the takeoff roll. The unbalanced tire created vibrations throughout the flight. These vibrations gradually loosened the landing gear mechanism, and when the plane tried to land in Halifax, The gear leg finally gave way. The imbalance had been slowly destroying the landing gear system for the entire flight. This accident showed how small problems can become big ones if they go unnoticed. Modern aircraft are designed to handle many types of failures, but they still depend on proper maintenance and inspection. A blown tire seems minor, but it nearly caused a disaster, with 77 people on board. People were already nervous about flying, and seeing another plane catch fire on landing didn't help. The dramatic images of sparks flying from the aircraft made headlines around the world. However, this was just a warm-up for the tragedy that would hit South Korea the very next day. The disaster that shocked the world.
On this Sunday night, a nation in mourning. A fatal and fiery plane crash in South Korea kills more than 170 people.
December 29, 2024 brought the deadliest aviation accident in recent memory. Jeju Air Flight 226 was landing at Muan Airport in South Korea when disaster struck. The Boeing 737-800, one of the most reliable planes in the world, came in for landing without its landing gear down, sliding along the runway at high speed before hitting a concrete wall. The flight had 175 passengers and 6 crew members returning from Bangkok, Thailand. Most were South Korean families coming home from vacation. The plane approached runway 19 in what appeared to be a normal landing, but something had gone terribly wrong with the aircraft's systems. Without landing gear, the plane hit the runway and slid for nearly the entire length of the tarmac. The belly of the aircraft scraped against the concrete at high speed, creating a shower of sparks and debris. Passengers inside would have felt the violent bouncing and grinding as the plane struggled to slow down. But the real disaster came at the end of the runway. Instead of soft ground or a safety area, there was a solid concrete embankment designed to hold navigation equipment. The plane hit this barrier at tremendous speed and immediately exploded in a massive fireball. Of the 181 people on board, only 2 crew members in the very back of the plane survived. They were found in the tail section, which had broken away from the main fuselage during the impact. Everyone else died instantly from the collision and the subsequent fire that completely destroyed the aircraft. What made this accident particularly puzzling was that it involved a Boeing 737-800, one of the most common and reliable planes in the world. This wasn't the troubled 737 MAX that had been grounded after 2 crashes, but an older, proven design that had been flying safely for decades. The investigation is still ongoing, but early reports suggest the crew may have been dealing with multiple emergencies that prevented them from lowering the landing gear properly. The following month brought another frightening incident, this time at the gate. Air Busan Flight 391 was getting ready to depart for Hong Kong when a fire suddenly started in the passenger cabin. The pushback was stopped immediately and smoke began filling the plane. The crew made the quick decision to evacuate everyone using the emergency slides. All passengers and crew got out safely, but 4 people were hurt during the evacuation itself. It took firefighters over an hour to control the blaze, and by then, the Airbus was completely destroyed. The airline later banned passengers from putting power banks in overhead bins, suggesting the fire might have been caused by a lithium battery. These batteries can overheat and catch fire, which is why they're normally not allowed in cargo holds. While this incident ended without fatalities, the worst was yet to come in American skies. Collision over Washington, January 29, 2025, brought America's deadliest aviation disaster in over a decade. American Airlines Flight 5342, operated by PSA Airlines, was approaching Washington National Airport when it collided mid-air with a military helicopter. The crash sent shockwaves through American aviation and raised serious questions about air traffic control procedures at one of the country's busiest airports. The CRJ-700 passenger jet was carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members from Wichita, Kansas, to the nation's capital. It was a routine evening flight that should have ended with a normal landing at Reagan National Airport. The pilots were experienced and the aircraft was well maintained, but they were about to face a situation no amount of training could have prepared them for. Initially, the crew planned to land on runway 01 using an instrument approach system that would guide them down safely. But as they got closer to the airport, air traffic control changed their instructions. The controller asked if they could accept a visual approach to the same runway, which meant the pilots would navigate by sight rather than relying on instruments. Then came another change. The controller asked if the crew could switch to runway 33, which was on the opposite end of the airport. This required a complex visual maneuver called a circling approach, where the plane would have to fly around the airport pattern and line up with a completely different runway. The pilots discussed this request briefly and agreed to accept it, even though they were quite close to the airport and hadn't prepared for this runway. Switching approaches so late in the flight is challenging and increases pilot workload significantly, but it's not unusual at busy airports like Washington National. At the same time, a US Army Black Hawk helicopter with the call sign PATP-5 was conducting a training flight along the Potomac River. The helicopter had 3 people on board and was following a route that military aircraft regularly use in the Washington area. According to regulations, the helicopter should have stayed below 200 feet to avoid interfering with commercial aircraft approaching the airport. The controller handling both aircraft asked the helicopter crew if they could see the passenger jet and told them to pass behind it. The helicopter crew appeared to confirm they had the airliner in sight, but there was a critical communication problem. The helicopter was using UHF radio frequencies while the passenger jet used VHF frequencies, so the pilots couldn't hear each other's transmissions. The passenger jet was equipped with a traffic collision avoidance system, which could detect the helicopter and warn the pilots about potential conflicts. But at such a low altitude, the system is programmed to avoid giving dangerous maneuver instructions that might cause the plane to hit the ground. Instead, it only provided a basic traffic advisory saying, "Traffic, traffic." The CRJ pilots only had seconds to react when they finally saw the helicopter. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, they managed to pull up slightly before the collision, but it wasn't enough. The 2 aircraft struck each other at about 325 feet above the Potomac River. The impact was devastating. All 64 people on the passenger jet and the 3 helicopter crew members died instantly. Both aircraft plunged into the icy river, where rescue teams worked through the night to recover bodies and wreckage. The collision was so violent that debris was scattered across a wide area of the river. This was the first crash of an American-registered passenger airliner on American soil since the Colgan air crash in Buffalo back in 2009. The tragedy highlighted several ongoing issues with aviation safety, including air traffic controller workload, airport congestion, and the challenges of mixing different types of aircraft in busy airspace. Questions immediately arose about why the helicopter was flying at the altitude where it collided with the airliner. 2 days after the Washington collision, another aircraft went down in Philadelphia. A Learjet 55 on a medical mission was taking a sick child and her mother back to Mexico when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The plane, carrying 6 people, including medical staff, took off normally and climbed quickly. But then, for unknown reasons, it suddenly entered a rapid descent of over 11,000 feet per minute. The jet hit the ground at 245 mph, creating a huge crater and killing everyone on board, plus 1 person on the ground. The crash was so violent that the plane completely disintegrated, making the investigation extremely difficult. However, investigators did recover the cockpit voice recorder, which may provide clues about what went wrong in those final moments. With so many accidents happening so close together, people began asking whether aviation was becoming less safe. Are we really seeing more crashes? Looking at this list of accidents, it's natural to think something is seriously wrong with aviation safety. In just over a month, multiple deadly crashes killed hundreds of people. But experts warn against jumping to conclusions based on clusters of accidents. Each of these crashes had completely different causes. The Azerbaijan Airlines flight was hit by a missile in a war zone. The Canadian plane had a tire problem that wasn't noticed. The South Korean crash involved landing gear issues. The Washington collision was about air traffic control and coordination. The Philadelphia crash is still under investigation. There's no common thread connecting these accidents except timing. It's like having several car accidents in your neighborhood in 1 week. It might seem alarming, but each accident probably had its own unique cause. Aviation experts point out that flying remains incredibly safe. The reason these crashes make such big news is precisely because they're so rare. However, some specific concerns have emerged that deserve closer attention. With Boeing 737s and 787s involved in some recent incidents, people are asking whether Boeing planes are safe to fly. The company has faced intense scrutiny since the 737 MAX crashes in 2018 and 2019, which killed 346 people and led to the plane being grounded worldwide for nearly 2 years. The recent Air India crash involving a Boeing 787 Dreamliner was particularly concerning because this plane has an excellent safety record. The 787 is Boeing's newest and most advanced aircraft, featuring composite materials, fuel-efficient engines, and state-of-the-art electronics. Since entering service in 2011, the 787 had never been involved in a fatal crash until the Ahmedabad incident. The Air India flight that crashed was bound for London from Ahmedabad when it went down in a residential area shortly after takeoff. The Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner stalled and crashed into buildings, killing 241 people on board and at least 29 on the ground. Only one passenger, a British national, survived the devastating impact. What made this crash so shocking was that Air India has a strong safety record and operates a modern fleet. The 787 involved in the crash was relatively new and had been properly maintained according to all reports. After the crash, Indian authorities ordered additional safety checks on all of Air India's Boeing 787s, but they didn't ground the planes. Just days after the Ahmedabad crash, another Air India Boeing 787 had to return to Hong Kong due to a technical issue. Flight AI-35 was heading to New Delhi when the crew reported problems and decided to turn back as a precaution. The plane landed safely, and all passengers were accommodated on other flights. While this incident ended without problems, it raised eyebrows because it involved the same airline and aircraft type as the fatal crash. Air India said the return was made as a matter of abundant precaution, suggesting the issue wasn't serious, but passengers were understandably nervous. Boeing has more than 360 Boeing 787-8As flying around the world, with American Airlines operating the most. The plane is considered one of the most modern and safe aircraft ever built, with advanced systems and materials that make it extremely reliable. The 787's safety record before the Air India crash was spotless. The question isn't whether Boeing planes are inherently unsafe. They're not. Like all modern aircraft, they're incredibly safe when properly maintained and operated. Boeing has implemented many changes since the MAX crisis, including better communication with airlines and more rigorous testing procedures. However, anytime there's an accident involving a particular manufacturer, it raises questions about design, maintenance, and oversight. When several plane crashes happen in a short time, our brains look for patterns even when none exist. This is human nature. We try to make sense of scary events by finding connections and explanations. After the first crash, people become more aware of aviation news. Stories that might normally get little attention suddenly become front-page news. Minor incidents that happen all the time seem more significant when they occur after major disasters. This creates a feedback loop where increased media coverage makes it seem like more things are going wrong, even when the actual accident rate hasn't changed. People start avoiding air travel or feeling anxious about flying, even though the statistical risk remains incredibly low. The 737 MAX crashes provide a good example of how our thinking can be wrong. After the first crash, many pilots and experts assumed it was mainly pilot error. It took a second crash for everyone to realize there was a real problem with the plane's design. This teaches us to be careful about drawing conclusions too quickly. Each accident needs to be investigated thoroughly before we can understand what really happened and what lessons we should learn. Passengers can help by staying informed about real safety issues while avoiding panic about statistical anomalies. Flying remains incredibly safe, and the recent accidents, while tragic, don't change that fundamental fact. The best tribute to the people who died in these crashes is to learn from their tragedies and use those lessons to make flying even safer for everyone else. Aviation safety isn't perfect, but it's remarkably good. The recent crashes remind us that flying involves some risk, but they don't mean the sky is falling. Each accident teaches valuable lessons that help prevent future tragedies. The next time you fly, remember that thousands of other flights are taking off and landing safely every day. The reason these crashes make news is because they're so unusual in our incredibly safe aviation system.